Hi, this is Tom. Welcome to the Tales of Mystara podcast. I'd like to start by saying thanks for giving my podcast a shot. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen, especially with the wealth of Dungeons and Dragons related content out there. My hope is that I can provide something a little bit different here, which will set this aside from the other podcasts. If you stick with it and you enjoy it, then I have achieved what I set out to do: to entertain, tell a story, immerse an audience, and share my love of D&D. Once again, thanks for listening, and without further ado, let's get on with the show. The following podcast is for a mature audience and contains detailed descriptions of violence. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Tales of Mystara podcast, an experimental podcast that mixes traditional storytelling with old-school pen and paper role-playing games played entirely solo. This could be considered a dark fantasy novel or a solo Dungeons and Dragons campaign. If treated like a novel, then nothing can be assumed. Only the dice can determine the outcome. It cannot be known whether a character will live or die. Nothing is precious. No one is safe from the roll of the dice. If treated like a tabletop role-playing game, there are no players, there is no dungeon master, there is only me, the rules, and the dice. In the millennia before the Great Rain of Fire, the land today known as Karameikos sat far to the north, in a cold and inhospitable land. Here, sparse remnants of the brute men race still dwelled, forced here by the expansion of the human race. Their country only travelled from time to time by pioneers and explorers. But the true masters of this region were the dragons, the most powerful worms in history, and the frost giants, who lived here in great numbers. The time before the cataclysm. The ancient writing of Allura Etheri. Welcome to a brand new Tales of Mystara story. This is the first episode in a new season of adventure, so there are a few things I need to cover before we once again step into the intricate world of Mystara. Firstly, don't worry if you haven't listened to Tales of Mystara before. Previous stories are not vital to the understanding of the story in this season. However, if you wish to listen to those episodes, then you can listen to the entire backlog on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/solo dungeon crawler. If you are currently listening to this on YouTube already, then you don't have to venture far. Unfortunately, I don't have the storage capacity on my podcast hosting platform to store the entire back catalogue, so apologies for this. So, what can you expect from this season of Tales of Mystara? This time, the adventure will not be a pre-published module. This time, I'll be taking a fairly mixed approach to the story. I will be using a combination of my own tables, as well as some adventures I have written myself to create the story. Over the last year, I have built up many of my own solo role-playing mechanics. These mechanics do not replace the rules of the game, They just fill in the gaps and help bring the world of Mystara to life. So just like last time, I will be sticking very strictly to the official Dungeons and Dragons rules. I will be using the same edition as I did in Season 1. These were the old school rules first published in the 1980s. I'll mostly be using the famous Dungeons and Dragons red box set written by Frank Mentzer and the Dungeons and Dragons Rules Cyclopedia. I'll also be using the Grand Duchy of Karameikos Gazetteer, which provides information about the world of Mystara. Sadly, in the last season, 2 of my characters, Elmo and Theodore, were killed, but will always be remembered. For this season, I will roll some new characters, 4 in total, and begin my new adventure in the world of Mystara. Just to reiterate, don't worry if you have not listened to Season 1. The seasons are reasonably self-contained stories. If you enjoy what you hear, you can always go back and listen to the older episodes. I would also recommend subscribing to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/solo dungeon crawler, as not only can you watch videos covering various other solo D&D campaigns that I run and access the entire backlog of Tales of Mystara and solo D&D tutorials, I also upload video versions of my other campaigns, which contain various visuals such as dungeon maps and sketches to help you visualize the gameplay. This campaign is strictly audio, however, this limitation means I can really focus on creating an immersive experience. I will, however, post some visual aids on my blog at solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com. Now, let's create 4 new characters for the game. Feel free to skip ahead if you'd prefer to get straight into the story. Character 1. Strength 7, -1 penalty. Intelligence 11. Wisdom 7, -1 penalty. Dexterity 13 +1 bonus. Constitution 11. Charisma 11. This character has a high dexterity, so will make a suitable thief. A thief begins with 1d4 hit points. Rolling for hit points. 4 hit points. That's a good start. Character 2. Strength 12. Intelligence 11. Wisdom 10. Dexterity 15 +1 bonus. Constitution 7, -1 penalty. Charisma 11. This character also has a high dexterity, and with no penalties to strength will make a suitable elf. With an intelligence of 11, it will meet the requirements. With the penalty to constitution, the halfling and dwarf are out of the question. Elves begin with 1d6 hit points. Rolling for hit points. 1 hit point, ouch. This character also has a -1 penalty to constitution. However, characters will always have at least 1 hit point. Character 3. Strength 11. Intelligence 13 +1 bonus. Wisdom 7, -1 penalty. Dexterity 15 +1 bonus. Constitution 11. Charisma 7 -1 penalty. Another character with high dexterity. I'm going to use the ability score adjustment rules to make a few tweaks. I will lower intelligence by 4 points from 13 to 9 to increase the strength to 13. The character will now make a suitable dwarf, and with a constitution of 11, it meets the requirements. Dwarves begin the game with 1d8 hit points. 7 hit points. Character 4. Strength 10. Intelligence 13 +1 bonus. Wisdom 6 -1 penalty. Dexterity 8 -1 penalty. Constitution 10. Charisma 12. This character has a high intelligence score, so will make a suitable magic user. Magic users begin the game with 1d4 hit points. 2 hit points with no constitution bonus. Ugh. I now have 4 brand new characters ready to enter the world of Mystara and join the others. Alexander Tagaris is a human thief of neutral alignment. He is the younger brother of Claudius Tagaris and has the same dark blonde hair and grey eyes. But where Claudius is slightly darker of skin, Alexander is as pale as a ghost. They are members of a wealthy but untitled Thyacian family from the city of Kelvin. While Claudius was always ambitious in his commitment to the Church of Karameikos, Alexander was different. As soon as he was old enough to leave home, he did, in an effort to get away from the caring responsibility of Claudius, who was a sickly boy when he was younger. Alexander went to Specularum, and there he learned the art of thievery in an effort to fend for himself. Alexander has 4 hit points. Solana of the Kalari tribe hails from the Elvish Central Forest east of Kelvin. She is of neutral alignment. Although an elf, she travels frequently through human lands looking for adventure and finding work mostly as a freelance soldier. She wears a dark green tunic embroidered with forest vines. Her hair is bone white and she has very pale blue eyes. She only has 1 hit point. Revere Stoneheart, a dwarf of neutral alignment from a comfortable family of craftsmen of journeyman status in Highforge. Revere left his family for human lands and adventure. His family never approved of his decision to leave, so he does not enjoy the benefits of the comfortable lifestyle generated from his family craft. In their opinion, he should stop gallivanting about and return to Highforge. Revere has earth-coloured skin and thick red hair tied in a bun on top of his head, and a long red beard intricately braided. He has 8 hit points. Cathbad, a human magic user of neutral alignment, is a close friend of Fyodor Ivanos, a magic user who tragically died in the ruins of Castle Mystamir. He comes from the same settlement in Radleb Woods, a purely Traladaran settlement of highly superstitious people. Just like Fyodor, Cathbad was also educated by Fyodor's grandfather Pabarin. Cathbad wears his deep brown hair, which is much less grey than Fyodor's, in a similar piratical ponytail. He has a friendly face, hazel eyes, and wears a dark green cloak. Cathbad walks with a cane after injuring himself from a bad fall on the farm. He has 2 hit points. There are also 3 characters still alive from my last story. Yolanda Vorloy, the fighter, Ilyena Petreos, the thief, and Claudius Tagaris, the cleric. If you'd like to read more about these characters, then please visit solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com or visit my YouTube channel at youtube.com/c/solodungeoncrawler. Now I have populated the world with some new characters, it's time to begin the adventure. Yolanda Vorloy, a 2nd level human fighter, and Ilyena Petreos, a 2nd level human rogue, have travelled a long and hard 21 days from Threshold to bring news of the magic user Fyodor Ivanos' death to his homestead. Fyodor died in their company when their adventuring party braved the ruins of Castle Mystara. That seemed a lifetime ago now. After leaving the comfortable town of Threshold, they followed a road through the mountains to the west, towards the Foamfire Valley, and then followed the Foamfire River south until they came to Verge. From there, they followed the Windrush River south to Riflian, a good city of Kalari elves who trade with humans. The 2 women took the opportunity to purchase equipment that might come in handy, and Ilyena bought a shaggy mule, which she named Bella, to help them carry the loads. They continued south along the Duke's Road and northwest along Westron Road, until finally turning north and into Radleb Woods. They arrive at the homestead on Moldane, the 4th day of Felmont, in the year AC 1000. 3 days after Beast's Day, when the last battle between King Halav and the Beastmen is celebrated. On Beast's Day, Traladarans all over Karameikos celebrate with parades, mock battles, dances, and of course, dressing up as Beastmen to wander the streets. Their arrival is welcomed warmly by Cathbad, a 1st level magic user, and an old but very close friend of the late Fyodor. He is very sad to hear the news and offers to take them for a drink in a very small hamlet not too far away called Alabast. Cathbad explains that Alabast is a settlement which grew from the ruins of a much more ancient city built by elves many centuries before. Also his teacher and Fyodor's grandfather, Pabarin Ivanos, had told them when they were growing up. We built the village on the old foundations. Even gave the village the same name, he explains. I remember being a child. Fascinating, responds Yolanda with a roll of her eyes. About that drink, says Ilyena. Alabast has a small tavern called the Sleeping Tankard, which is decorated festively for Beast's Day, with painted masks, decorated swords, modelled renditions of kings and other such trinkets to mark the occasion. Despite the size of Alabast, the tavern is bustling with Traladaran men and women, and it is not long before Ilyena, Yolanda and Cathbad are approached by a storyteller called Tacklin Merryborn, who, in a drunken haze, tells them the tale of the Palace of Evendur. He says, "The Palace of Evendur sits empty and overgrown on the northern shore of the dried-up and long-forgotten River Carthas, north of the once great elven city of Alabast, in the deepest part of Radleb Woods." Oh, here we go. The palace was erected on the very edge of a much older and vast forest filled with mysterious and dark magic. Nobody knows why Evendur built his palace there. Evendur was a human sorcerer
with wild, unpredictable power who went missing many lifetimes ago. Some people say that it was the enchanted forest that gave him his power. Others say that he fell in love with a dryad, a fey spirit bound to an ancient tree.
Sounds like a catch.
Nobody knows for sure, but everybody agrees that the abandoned hall of the palace contains valuable treasure and wondrous magic, and perhaps the answer to my question. Why did Evendur build his palace on the edge of the forest?
Treasure? Okay. You've piqued my interest finally. Taklin asks the party to travel to the palace of Evendur and find out why the famous sorcerer built his palace on the edge of the enchanted forest. He wants this information for a folktale he is working on. He's not interested in treasure, and he offers 30 gold pieces for any useful information the party can bring back. Clearly this man is not local to Alabast, and much wealthier than they could have guessed. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. I want to take the opportunity to discuss some of my solo role-playing mechanics, so you might better understand how I run my games. For me, the problem is handled from 3 angles. The first angle is to emulate the role of the Dungeon Master, so I can experience the game from the perspective of a player. The second angle is to emulate player actions, so I can experience the game from the perspective of the Dungeon Master. The third angle is to provide a means to experience the game from the perspective of the observer. I try to mix these 3 perspectives seamlessly so I can gain the ultimate tabletop fantasy role-playing experience. I think it's easier to lose yourself in a world if that world acts freely of its own accord and you feel at each moment that you are along for the ride. If I can suspend my disbelief, immerse myself, and be surprised and enchanted by each moment as it arises, then I have achieved my goal. By emulating player actions, it's easier to avoid metagaming. Metagaming, in this context, for those who haven't heard the term, is making use of knowledge learned outside of the game that a character would not know. To achieve player autonomy, I tend to roll dice to determine which character will act in a given situation. A dice with sides equal to the number in the party will suffice, with any additional sides meaning they act as a party. But remember that sometimes actions the characters take might be quite obvious, so there's no need for a roll. You're probably wondering how randomly determining a character's actions affects logic. It's important to remember that in these situations logic won't always apply. For example, in a fantasy novel, characters tend to act very logically and tend to take the best possible action in a situation. In a group game of D&D, this isn't the case. Players often do illogical things. They might try something goofy or make silly mistakes. That's okay, it's part of the fun of the game and often leads the story down surprising avenues. We tell great stories about these kinds of situations when we recall group games, so there's every reason to have this in our solo games too. To decide what a character does, I roll on a table of common character actions, a simple d20, with each column having 3 entries to choose from. Things like hit, touch, look, or listen, attack, intimidate. I simply choose the result that makes the most sense. Just some food for thought. If you'd like to know more about how I run my solo games, please visit solodungeoncrawler.blogspot.com or follow me on Twitter at crawlersolo. But now, back to the game. After some discussion, Ilyena, Yolanda, and even Cathbad decide to test the authenticity of Tacklin Merryborn's tale. For Ilyena, who has left home to take part in the tradition known as the shearing ceremony, is out in the world seeking adventures just like this, so she can return to her family and be accepted with honour. Her cloak is sheared at the bottom, leaving it ragged to mark out her venture. Cathbad, who wishes to know something of Theodore's more adventurous way of life to bring him closer to the man in his final days, asks to join them and assures them that his old injury will not be a problem and he should not be treated any differently. Despite the cane, the women had earlier remarked at the man's ability to keep pace and had pondered how much the cane was merely a simple conduit for magic rather than a walking aid. The following morning, Cathbad does what he can to prepare for the expedition, and just before noon they set out north, following a rough, hand-drawn map Tacklin produced shortly after the party agreed to venture to the ancient palace. They travel deep into Radleb Woods until they eventually stumble upon the overgrown, dried-up riverbed of Corthas. They cross the ancient moat bridge, and shortly after, a large arched doorway outside the huge ancient palace comes into sight. The woods here become a heavier forest that seems very strange and emanates a strong sense of magic. Smothering creepers hang from the archway that surrounds the doors of the palace. High walls stretch far above, running from each side of the palace, seeming to encircle the dense and far more ancient forest that lies beyond the palace and appears to be encroaching rapidly, as if the forest itself wants to swallow the palace whole. The doors themselves are dark, wooden, and ornately carved with simple patterns. It's mid-afternoon now, on the 5th day of Felmont, in the year AC 1000. The scene has been set, and the party is standing before the great doors leading into Evendur's palace. It's time for the dice to take over, but first I will decide on the party's marching order. Ilyena will lead. She has a good armour class of 2. Cathbad, who is presently a very weak first-level magic user, will take the middle, and Yolanda will guard from the back. It's not perfect, but there are only 3 of them at this point. Yolanda and Ilyena creep like wild hunting cats towards the ancient ornate doors. Yolanda rigorously searches for traps as they do this. She has a 15% chance to succeed. She doesn't notice anything out of the ordinary around the door, but as she approaches, the creeping vines hanging in front of the door suddenly reach out for her, trying to wrap themselves around her. Yolanda must make a saving throw versus paralysis in order to escape the grasping vines. She needs a 13 to save. Before the vines can grapple her, she swiftly moves out of the way. Both Ilyena and Yolanda back up a little, attempting to get out of reach of the vines. Cathbad stares forward in shock and disbelief. Yolanda pulls a flask of oil from her backpack and will attempt to throw it at the blighted vines. She's 30 feet away, which is medium range, but she gets a +1 for her dexterity bonus. She rolls a natural 1. She throws the flask miles off target, and it smashes into the outer wall of the palace. She curses at the waste of good oil and tries again. She rolls a 19 this time. It's enough to hit the plant, dousing it in oil. "Quick," she says to Ilyena. "A torch." Ilyena lights a torch and throws it at the plant. She has no bonus on her roll. When a torch is thrown, however, targets are always treated as armor class 10. It's a 10. The torch hits the plant and it bursts into flames. The oil will burn for 2 rounds, inflicting 2d8 damage in that time. The blighted vine has 11 hit points in total. In 2 rounds, there is nothing left of the blighted plant, except the acrid smell of smoke. "Let's get inside," Ilyena says. Before them stands the large ornate double doors, leading into the ancient palace of Evendur. What strange and mysterious things can the party expect to find inside? And will they ever get to the bottom of why Evendur built his palace on the edge of the ancient forest? Find out next time. You have been listening to Tales of Mystara. I sincerely hope you have enjoyed this episode. If you would like to send a small donation to show your appreciation and help support this show so it can continue to grow and expand, then please visit paypal.me/TomDnD. In this episode, I'd like to thank John Hain, David Zacher and Aaron Anderson for their kind donations across May and June. Thanks so much. If you have listened on YouTube, please give this video a like. Feel free to add a comment to let me know your thoughts. If you don't want to miss a future video, then make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon to receive a notification when I upload a new one. If you have listened on iTunes, then I'd appreciate it if you would leave a 5-star review. These things really help, and they let me know that the work I put into the show is worth it, and that I'm making content that people like. After all, that's why I'm doing this. Thanks for listening, and as always, see you next session.